Hello and welcome to my review of the new third-party 1/100 scale kit, the Special Forces Industry SentineL, I think. It's a really confusing name. It just does not stick in my head and doesn't make sense to me. This is theoretically a master grade style and quality kit, but with a metal inner frame instead. But we'll see how well it lives up to master grade. There will be timestamps in the description and the comments, and the video should be chaptered because this is going to be a bit of a long video, so feel free to skip around or skip anything you're not interested in. Like the unboxing section that we're about to do, you could skip if you want to. I usually wouldn't bother because I just don't really care about the boxes, but I do have some things that I would like to say. Like, there are pre-painted parts, the V-fin on the D-runner, the eyes and cameras and everything on the M-runner, as well as a pair of beam sabers that are painted. There are also lots of spare parts, including alternatives for a lot of those painted pieces. The eyes and cameras all have a separate clear runner, and there's also extra beam sabers that are unpainted and clear. So that means you get 2 pairs of beam sabers with the kit. And most of all, the kit doesn't tell you, but you get 2 extra optional brown O runners. The O runner is usually the yellow runner for all of the yellow thrusters and linings on the kit. But if you want to, you can actually do all of that instead in brown. Nowhere is it shown in the promotional images, it's not listed in the manual for the parts list, runner list. So if, like me, you didn't realise it until you were running out of runners and were like, what are these 2? It would be a bit late to use them, but thankfully I only wanted to use the yellow anyway. The kit comes with a stand with a metal pole to help sturdily hold it up, 25 runners, not including the beam sabers, etc., and lots of bags, I feel like. 9 bags have 2 runners in them, but 7 have only 1, and then there are 2 sets of individually bagged beam sabers, as well as the decals with their own bag, and it just seems like an awfully waste of plastic. This is already a plastic wasting enough hobby as it is, without making it worse. But even beyond that, I was also just drowning in them while building it. They got everywhere, until I was finished that building session and could go and then put them in the bin and everything. I wouldn't usually bother mentioning it because it's like the definition of a nitpick, but I have at time of recording already started building the V-Tiger Hainu, and that does not have anywhere near this issue at all. Its runners are well bagged and well considered and grouped together so that you have most of what you need in the same bags. It even has one bag with like 5 runners in them, so thought it was worth mentioning as just something that could be slightly improved. The manual is a little bit disappointing. It's just a very plain manual. I would have liked if it would have included the promotional images even at least in it, as the promo images they took for it are excellent. They did them in a full diorama and everything really, with buildings all around, and I would just really like a physical copy of them in the manual to look at. With it being a third party kit and not necessarily guaranteed to stay up for sale online and everything, that the pictures might become hard to find eventually too. Also, it's a new design, obviously, with no anime or anything, so some lore could have been cool, but very, very understandable that they didn't hire a writer just for that. But it would have been nice, could have been cool. And here's the metal inner frame that it comes with. It doesn't really have any detail on it, it's not really displayable on its own. It's really quite thin and skeletal, but it does at least have very nice, prominent, coloured pistons, which is always really nice. The lower knee joints are very hard to bend. Out of box, for me, they were basically stuck. I had to just force it to start moving, and then it started working fine. Once it is all together, though, those pistons are actually really quite disappointing. They don't actually attach to the foot like you expect, but instead to the ankle guards for some incomprehensible reason. It makes the ankle guards awkward to manoeuvre, and leaves an exposed ball joint if you take them off entirely, like I might like to, because they're just so big that I'm not too sure they fit the design, and they keep lying awkwardly. I have them sitting in a way I like now, but the way they connect with the weight of the pistons and everything that limiting your in and out kind of movement, I don't have a lot of choice and control in how they lie, so I might still take them off and then just have to put up with the exposed ball joint. The knee joint now does make a lot more sense, and you can see it has quite a good moving design with the knee separating and a piece of the calf folding in and disappearing to give more clearance. I think it's that calf mechanism that causes it to be stuck seaming out of box, because it causes quite a big click when doing it and getting that piece to fold in, so just beware of the pieces rubbing if you're going to paint. It doesn't look like they do though, but I'm not sure, just beware of it. And be careful to get it together tightly as well, because once I did get it all together, my right lower knee wouldn't bend at all until I pushed the folding piece on more. It didn't look like it was any more attached, but then I was able to force the knee bend, and now it works fine. So just beware that the clearance for this part is very tight, so make sure that the piece is also on tightly. There's also an expanding thigh panel too. However, because that thigh panel just attaches onto what was a floppy piece of frame, in standing positions it can just fall open because there's nothing really holding it up. It also makes it difficult to assemble because you're attaching the panel just onto one small peg through another 2, I think, layers of armour. I definitely think it's worth it though. I would rather have simplistic expanding thigh armour than none at all, but it's not exactly elegant and it can be a little annoying. Speaking of floppy pieces, the cockpit on the chest, which isn't really a cockpit at all, personally a little disappointing, can flop a little. It's nowhere near as bad as it seemed like it was going to be while assembling it, but it is noteworthy because the entire rest of the kit is solid, as you would expect from a metal frame. But there are a lot of connections that are just plastic though, and even they are really solid. More than Bandai even though you might wish they weren't while assembling. For example, as solid as the narrative is, it still has what I find on pretty much all Bandai kits where the joints have a little play in them. You set the narrative down and its legs move a little further apart. You try to move an arm and it moves the chest butterfly rather than the shoulder. None of that is an issue by any means, and again this has a metal frame so it better be more solid, but it's noteworthy that this doesn't have that kind of play and is more solid. But then again, to be fair, this doesn't even have butterfly joints, never mind ones with such insane range as the narratives. This is actually my first time building a kit with a metal inner frame. I have a lot in the backlog, which is really why I'm making reviews to try and force myself not to backlog, especially third-party kits because they don't have an anime to get me to build things from watching it. So I'm not sure how it's handled in this compared to other metal frame kits, but it made for a very unique build that really doesn't feel like a master grade. It's actually almost like a high grade plus, but that doesn't really do it any justice either. It is somewhere between high and master grade, I feel like, but it is much more involved than just a high grade. A maybe more accurate term could be master high grade. But the reason I can't escape the high grade feeling is because it doesn't build as though it has an inner frame, despite it obviously having a metal one, because in lots of places you're layering on fake frame. For example, on the shoulders, the side skirts, the tips of the wrists, or best example, the knees. The brown on the outside goes on, and then you attach a layer of brown to that on the inside to fill the gap and pretend it is a full piece. And then you put that whole large white part onto the knee, if you can. The connection is tight on my left knee, such that I'm not sure I really have it on right. The silver lining is that the lower central brown piece goes on top and also attaches it to the metal knee frame, so it's secure regardless of how well connected the white part is. But I just need to go back and trim and sand and see if I even really have it lined up. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, that's more for the build section. It also often doesn't feel like it has an inner frame because some parts just don't really attach to it that well. When you start on the chest, the pieces are just going around it without any strong attachments to it, but it is attaching. Then lastly, and maybe most of all, is the size of some parts feels high-grade-esque. Again, like the knees, but also the forearms, and especially some of the accessories. In fact, really, it's the guns that retroactively made me realise how high-grade-y it is. On the main mobile suit, the chunkiness and size of the parts is sometimes a strength at least. For example, holy cow, the side skirts are chunky, and help make the design more unique, which is good because a primary complaint I've seen, or benefit for some, is the design's similarities to the Mk-II Gundam. I unfortunately don't have an MG one to compare with just now. I'll have to make a short comparing them down the line once I've rebuilt the Mk-II. But the shoulder design and shape and the chest being a very similar dark blue does make them look related. Enough that before building I was trying to think of different colours to paint the chest to help differentiate them. I do still wonder how the chest would look in white or especially grey, but after building and having it in hand it feels a lot more unique because the process of building always lets you notice things you never would have before. Like, I didn't notice from the pictures how big the side skirts are or how thin the waist abdomen is, which makes it look really quite powerful and is thinner than the Mk-II and really helps differentiate the proportions. And of course the yellow lining is a major difference between the two and the most unique thing about this mobile suit design really, and what I absolutely love. It's unique as it is, but it also leaves it open to so many unique custom paint jobs, because there just aren't many other mobile suits with lining like this. Although there is enough that it's the main thing making me unsure about painting the chest white or grey, because I'm not sure if it would be too similar to the Stargazer then. But the lines, as well as the amount of lines and options that the kit comes with for the cheap price, are why I bought two. Even though I'm really not sure I want to be building a whole nother one of these again, but I want one looking something like this, and then the second one can be black with metallic purple lines, or military greens with maybe light gunmetal or silver lines, or the lines could just be inner frame colour and look like mechanicals showing through. Like I said, while going through the runners, you can surprisingly also even just have it as it is, but with brown lines. With the brown being the same colour as the fake inner frame on the kit by default, it could look like it's just inner frame exposed through the armour, and might really suit weathering as a result. The Gem Sniper-like grunt head is also another unique point in its favour. I worried that the grunty look of the design and shape and this head would conflict with the major protagonist energy of the yellow, but for me personally, in hand, it doesn't, and I'm a big fan. But you get the option to tweak that too anyway with the alternate Gundam-like head that uses the pre-painted antenna pieces from the D-Runner. For both heads though, they look a little cheap from underneath, as it's just a flat surface. They didn't recess the joint into the head or anything. The head has a unique design. I say Gundam-like, but then the fins aren't actually V-fins, they're separate, and the shape and proportions of the head, how small the face is, really doesn't match any other Gundam. Ironically, what it actually maybe most matches is a version of the Mk-II, the build Mk-II Gundam. Overall, actually, the look of the mobile suit and the yellow lines does feel very, very Build Fighters to me, which might be why I like it, because I love that original series. It actually feels more like a build Mark II than the actual build Mark II does. Actually, now that I think about it, it's even the Gym K9 that I'm thinking of when I think about the green colour scheme that I'd like to do it in. Although it's actually the Gym Spartan that I'm thinking of, because I always mix up those two in my head and forget how the Gym K9 actually looks like. Anyway, yeah, I'll cover them more a lot later, but in addition to the Gundam head, it does also come with a lot more parts and accessories and options, and really just has quite a strong value for money and a lot of different ways you can display it and different aesthetics. But where the chunky size of some parts looks a bit like a detriment though is the forearms. The back looks nice with the extra grey of the beam sabers and their holders, which allow them to be used as beam tonfas, like a suit from Unicorn. The front, however, are extremely plain, and almost just one big block of white. They absolutely would have benefited from a brown insert to fake inner frame showing through like other master grades have on the arms, or even better, some yellow lining to better match the rest of the suit. It actually could have been both, considering you can make any of the yellow parts brown anyway. But I think yellow would be better, because when you look at the overall suit, the yellow is actually very concentrated in the centre, and could have done with some not just on the arms, but also some on the calves and feet, and just spread out through the body more in general. Adding more of the line colour is now my top painting priority for this colour scheme, I think. For example, maybe adding yellow on top of the grey of the calves? I'm not sure, it's kind of a difficult thing to add more of. The kit has a matte finish. In some places it feels painted, like especially the chest. I actually really wasn't sure if it was painted. The runner just looks so matte that I could only tell once I started cutting off parts and could see that the plastic was the same and that it was all plastic. So it thankfully isn't all pre-painted, but best of both worlds because the lovely matte finish really makes it look like it. The kit is undergated a lot, but not so much on the white, not really at all on the white. The back skirt has the only bad nub placement, with them for some reason putting a nub right on the part that will show through the thruster rather than anywhere else. But for as many undergates as the kit has, and for as annoying as they are, there are a lot of just normal, slightly visible nubs. The undergating prevents the worst effects of nubs, like big white marks on dark plastic, like the chest, but all the normal nubs that remain will still be prone to my main issue, which is that they catch dirt and become more visible over time. So, sure, you don't really need to undergate the white, because it doesn't stress mark and looks fine out of box with nub marks really, but over time, and as you handle and pose and move the kit, they really start to show up a lot more and collect finger dirt and just dust, and yeah, it's good. It's maybe even above average in terms of nubs, but with how annoying the undergating is while building, it feels disappointing that that's just where it ends up. I should say, as I'm not sure how common of an opinion it actually is, but I find undergated nubs a little more annoying to build in general. They take more effort because you have to rotate the piece so much. Obviously it can be easier than normal nubs, but only if it saves you having to sand, etc. The undergating is annoying on this because it's very inconsistent. Parts will have normal nubs and undergated ones on the same piece so often, and the instructions don't note it, meaning you have to spend longer on each piece and rotate the runners and check more, but also because it has lots of just completely unnecessary undergates that add nothing. For example, the sniper eye camera is undergated at the bottom, even though it's a recessed piece that you would never see the nub of. And notice I said it's undergated at the bottom, because it isn't at the top. There's even a peg that you have to sandwich together from two parts that's undergated, just making it needlessly more difficult to close the parts together and make the peg the right size and not leave any material in between the two halves to make the peg accidentally bigger and stick out more. And there are also quite a lot of places and I'm sure I've had this on Bandai kits before too, but maybe not, maybe just other kits, where it's undergated or just gated on an edge. The one that I remember is the neck, so hopefully you can see what I mean, but it makes nubs far more difficult because you need to trim and try to clean up two different walls of plastic very close to each other. So for all that annoyance, the fact that the end result is just above average visibility of nubs, or invisibility of nubs, is a bit disappointing. I do, however, want to say the plastic I personally found slightly weirdly easy to clean up the nubs from, and along with the matte finish, and because I noticed it being quite sturdy a couple of times, I want to say the plastic is decently high quality. The moulding, however, not so much. It's not bad, but there is some flash. For example, the left back skirt, the sides of the centre of the waist, the sides of the cock, really, I suppose. The shoulder vents. Really, most often where there's a hole or a line put into the plastic, there's generally some flash there. This might be why my left knee was so difficult to put on, as it definitely did cause assembly issues in some parts. Like the side skirts have a piece of brown frame, a line of brown frame coming through them, and that pushing that through the white armour was very tight, and I'm pretty sure that's because I hadn't noticed flash on the piece before trying to put it together. Like I said earlier, it comes with a lot of things, so let's finally cover everything that it comes with. And to be fair to the kit, it's probably worth bearing in mind when I complain about certain things that it does come with so much. It has two shields, a joint to connect them to the arms, and two arms that attach them to the backpack instead, two booster units for the legs, the alternate Gundam-like head, 4 beam sabers, 2 clear plastic, 2 painted, surprisingly 2 rifles, 2 pistols, 2 missile launchers, 2 over-the-shoulder cannons, the stand, and a bunch of spare parts. Most useless and honestly weird. There are a lot of parts that are doubled even though they're on a runner which you get 2 of. So for no good reason and seemingly just to waste plastic and cost budget for the kit's design, you get 4 of parts that you only need 2 of. It has a backpack as well, which I'm counting here as an accessory because it doesn't really fit the design by itself in my opinion. It's just too big and comes too far out of the back, and the design of the mobile suit doesn't really look high mobility, so while it's cool that the backpack has a lot of moving thrusters, it just doesn't really feel like it belongs. I also just don't love the thruster design. I'm only calling them thrusters because of the context of them being on the backpack tells me that that's what they must be, not because they look like thrusters to me. They're also just inconsistent. The green inserts are nice, but why are they only on the lower ones? What is supposed to be the difference between those lower ones and the larger side ones? Like in lower, what functionality is the green supposed to serve if it's only on some? And also, just practically, if you were to add custom LEDs to the kit, why does it only give you green parts which can be in clear for half of the thrusters? I'll cover more of why later, but the backpack is definitely the worst part of the kit. To me, it's just more of a platform to add more things onto the mobile suit, like the huge cannons. The cannons look really nice. Out of box, the inner workings could do with being more colour separated, but they are very parts separated, so I'm very excited to paint them. You also actually get 2 more spare too, which could be really useful because they're really just techie cylinders, so they could be useful for all kinds of things. You could have them being worked on by mechanics in a diorama, or you could even use them as something like GN drives. The cannons also have EPAX cartridges at the back, which are removable. Again, could be cool to show them getting reloaded in a hangar diorama, and because they're from the yellow runner you also can make 2 more brown ones. and this is the only part where I think they probably definitely look better in the brown. It just makes more sense for what they are, but also it would better contrast the yellow venting that they're next to. I don't remember what they're called, please comment if you know, but they also have these red cylinders on the side, like a lot of UC mega rifles have. You can see them on like the High News Mega Beam rifle and on the Deep Striker's huge cannon. The instructions tell you to put the cannons onto the backpack like this, with the red on the inside, but personally I think it would look a lot better with the red on the outside like this, to make the red more visible, which is how I'll be displaying and leaving it from now on, I think. Because the red just looks really nice, and it's extra nice detail and mechanics, so I want it to be as visible at all times as possible. The cannons have scope cameras on them, but no part separation for a camera, and the kit doesn't come with any stickers at all. Comes with decals, but no stickers, so you can't even put a sticker on them. You'd have to paint them if you wanted them to be more noticeable. And lastly, the cannons also have an expanding gimmick, like for example the Gundam Virtues, but it is very tight. I built one expanded and one condensed because I wasn't sure if I would actually be able to get them to move to show you the expanding gimmick once it was actually built. The backpack is also for attaching the shields. They attach to the two arms and give it a much more full armour Gundam Thunderbolt vibe. The shields themselves are a pretty simple design made out of large parts, but they do the job and they look good. The missile launchers are pretty simple, they just attach to the arms where the shields would, and you can take off the ends of them to expose the red missiles inside, and if you don't do that, they're really quite very plain. Unfortunately, even though they use the same arm connection as the shields, they didn't think it through and go the extra mile to make them attachable to the backpack like the shields, because they just have a simple peg, unlike the shields which have a peg hole and then a joint which goes into that, which then connects to the arm. A better connection might have been if the backpack arms just ended in a peg hole like the arms, rather than a peg, because that way you also wouldn't have to remove and find some place to store the joint that connects the shields to the arms. You could have just plugged it straight into the backpack arms, and then the backpack arms would have been compatible with the missile launchers too. So, bit of a shame and a missed opportunity, and probably would be a simpler design even, and slightly cheaper maybe. The pistols are very simple, but they're pistols, so big thumbs up from me. A Gundam with pistols just looks cool. But still, I wish they were made easier to paint, because it would have been very easy for them to do. The top is a separate piece anyway, so just make that piece have a hole in the middle, and move the sculpt of the centre to the centre piece, then it would be easier to paint and mask the kind of barrel of the handgun. There's also just a big trench in that part too for some reason, and it's really quite ugly for what should be a nice smooth gun barrel. They also don't have any slot for connecting to the hand, but they're small and light, so it shouldn't be an issue. The two rifles that it comes with are far too big. They're way bigger than the mobile suit, and they just don't look great. They're longer than snipers for any other kit at this scale, and while the suit does have a sniper head, it doesn't have the insane articulation needed to pose weapons like these, especially in this size. But it also comes with a Gundam head and a lot of design aspects to the body that more suit a protagonist kind of suit rather than a sniper. But the only other handheld ranged weapon it comes with are the pistols, which are harder to notice on a shelf and still fit the sniper vibe more. You don't get just a normal beam rifle, and for some reason they didn't quite design these rifles to be transformed into that. They almost did, but they didn't. The barrel is almost all just one piece that sandwiches together. You only add onto it the sight notch at the front, and the peg for the barrel tip is also stupidly on the main barrel rather than on the tip, so you can't even make it slightly shorter if you want to by just removing the barrel tip. The whole large barrel is then just attached by sliding it over a peg, meaning you can actually rotate it a little, but there's no reason you'd want to, so it just adds some slight instability. And my question is why? Why do it this way? Just a long circular peg doesn't make for a good looking beam rifle on its own without this barrel, so why not just design the peg as a normal, more square beam rifle? This large barrel could still go over it. It could look so much better that way, because then they could also cut holes out of the sides of the barrel and have more internals and frame on show and break up this huge block of blue. This barrel is why it feels so high grade E. Why the rifle is what made me realise how the rest of the kit is also just like a master high grade. And if this barrel had inner frame showing through, or just wasn't one big chunk of blue, I might not have fully realised that. I want to be clear, it really isn't bad though. It still has the sight as a separate piece made out of a few parts, and still has the detachable and movable stock, which is really cool, and you still get two of them. The barrel is just such a huge missed opportunity to me, and makes the rifle just far too large in my opinion. Then, lastly, are the leg boosters. I'm actually quite a big fan of these as an option to change the look of your kit. They don't quite look seamless, but they look nice, and also add more yellow to the lower body. These are one of the pieces supposed to make it look more Gundam than Grunt, but the reason I like them is because really they also fit a Grunt perfectly fine. I can't think of any Grunts that have these kind of leg boosters. Let me know if you know one, because it's always fun to Google and take a look at a Grunt. I can think of a lot more Gundams that have them, but something like the Jaeger looks pretty close to having them, and pretty much no matter what, the rest of the mobile suit looks like a high-spec Grunt anyway, which the boosters suit perfectly fine. So yeah, I like them. And it's hard to complain too much about the accessories when it comes with so many of them. Unfortunately, not so much in terms of build experience though. The main mobile suit was okay, like a 2 or 3 out of 10 on the finger hurting tightness scale, and I did notice it having some well designed sturdiness. Putting the top of the shoulders on involves potentially putting quite a lot of angled pressure on a peg, and at one point for me it slipped and I thought, oh god, I've just broken it. But then I looked at it and it was fine, because they'd given it an extra kind of strut to prevent it breaking in what feels like the exact way I would have broken it. So they predicted me perfectly. But there were a lot of tight parts. The pectorals on the chest were tight and took quite a bit of force to actually get fully in and attached to the yellow, and so I'm not really looking forward to taking them apart again to paint. Like I said, the shoulder points took quite a lot of force. The connection for the inside of the yellow shin vents are just not well designed. You have to push the brown into the yellow vent, but the tab is on the edge rather than being centered. It's another instance of kind of fake frame, because you actually have to push the brown into the yellow vent, but the tab is on the edge rather than being centered. So it's 10 times more difficult, because if you press anywhere other than that edge, then it just won't line up and it won't work. I had to press on the edge while also wedging the other side with my fingernail to hold it out and stop it bending and moving and unlining itself up. It's just a bit annoying, and unlike a lot of other parts, it's not because it's just tight and the mould tolerances were just off, but the actual design and where they put the connection. Sandwiching together the forearms might also be similar. I can't tell if it's design or just plastic, but once I got it, it seemed fine. But it was one of the hardest parts of the mobile suit to put together, because the beam saber holder just wouldn't seem to line up. I think what it needed was just to have the beam holder fully tabbed into the half of the forearm with the sockets for the other half's pegs, and that made it line up a lot easier, but I could be misremembering, so if it doesn't work, try fully pushing it into the other side and then putting them together. But I don't know if it'll help, because this is a piece where I just don't know why it worked in the end. Once it started going together, it went together pretty easy, and I don't know what the difference was. I also kind of similarly found the thighs difficult to actually line up and get together. The vents at the top of the boosters I don't think I have anywhere near in all the way, but maybe they're supposed to stick out like this. I also don't have the blue on, well, the waist cock in all the way because it was just tight. Again, that's because there'll be flash there because it's holes in the plastic, and I could have gotten them in all the way, but I didn't really want to because in case I need to take them out again to paint. The brown tips of the wrist also go in very tightly and are another good example of the fake frame. The fact that they were extra pieces that go in on top of the grey was really surprising and strange. It's always the other way around. The instructions are a bit unclear often. I think that's what my issue was with the thighs, was trying to figure out where exactly they went on the thighs, and they use writing at times, which is pretty much always avoided for a good reason, because if you don't know the language, you don't know what it says. I didn't translate any of it and still finished the kit, so it's obviously not critically necessary, but still. The instructions also list the wrong part for the shin boosters. It says 11, but it's actually 31. And like I think I said earlier, the instructions don't note undergating like Bandai now does, which would have been very helpful for this kit. Really, it's just not a great build, but it is quick. The entire upper body only took 3 hours, I think, and it seemed like it was going to be an annoying amount of runners to deal with at first, but while there is a lot of them, it just keeps using the same runners for pretty much the whole body, so it becomes easy to find a rhythm. So it's not too bad. I had a good enough time with it, until I finished the main mobile suit and started building everything else. Which brings me back to the backpack. The backpack sucks, pure and simple. Everything was tight and finger hurting. I had to sand E2's peg and had to leave most parts with a slight gap, especially the sides. You need to have something to poke or push with on hand, as well as it has you put a green part deep into a thruster, and you won't get your finger in all the way unless you're a child, so you need something to poke it in with. It's definitely several tiers lower in quality, enough that how much you want to use the backpack affects how much I'd recommend the kit. The rest of the accessories are better though. I think their build experience is definitely still a tier below the main body though, but I find it hard to say. My experience was coloured by doing the backpack first, so there's a chance I had just gotten more used to it, or they might be the same quality as the body, but I was just more critical and aware after the backpack. I don't know. I don't think so though, because there's just more building needing done for them, and so more opportunities for fitment issues because they're not going onto pre-built metal frame like the body, so you just have to do more building. The cannons went pretty smoothly. They're very nicely separated. They're the best designed and most involved accessory and would be excellent to paint. Like I said earlier, the inner barrel is built up from quite a lot of pieces that could look really good with paint to separate them and bring out the detail. The red on the cannons really pops and stands out and looks just really good. As usual, I don't really like just plastic red. I want to paint this, probably a metallic red, but that's just what I personally default to. But compared to the rest of the kit, which all has quite a nice matte finish, the red is quite glossy and more plastic looking, so the red could benefit from paint. As cool as the cannons are though, they don't build perfectly either. The main assembly armour just wouldn't close properly for me, but I just kept going because I could see it was going to have parts put on top of it and around it to sandwich it and help keep it closed and hide any seam line from the top at least. The yellow V's do not go on all the way at all. You could maybe force them with like pliers, but aesthetically they're okay as is, not in all the way and with a slight gap at part of them. If you wanted them on all the way and on properly, I think you'd be better maybe to heat them and bend them just ever so slightly so that they actually get clearance on the rest of the gun. And if you were planning on painting the main body of the cannons, you would kind of have to do that to stop them just completely scraping the paint off the part where they attach. And then, like I said earlier, the expanding barrel gimmick is cool, but it's very tight. Lastly, you have the missile launchers, so that the arms have something to do alongside the shoulder cannons. They look really quite simple, but they're an overly long build. Not complicated, but too many parts for how simple and plain they look when done, and how simple they just are. The build overall is occasionally just quite unergonomic, like the cannons for example. They have J, 5, 6, 7 and 8 when it could have just been 2 unique pieces rather than 4 to worry about. I'm not even sure that they're different. And yeah, similar with the ARM MLRS, they're just too complicated. Shields are simple. The very articulated arms for attaching them to the backpack aren't great to assemble. The capping pieces for them are tight, or rather I think just don't line up well. I was tired by that point, and so just ended up using my teeth. I didn't have to use any real pressure, as you can see from the lack of plastic marks, but for whatever reason, using my teeth just immediately made them line up and start to go in. Don't do this though. You can damage the plastic, like I said, but even more so, you can damage your teeth, so don't be lazy like me. Instead, if you're going to be lazy, do it properly. Get a pair of pliers and a cloth, and then you can put the cloth over the pieces and use the pliers to force things together. The cloth prevents the pliers from touching the parts and digging into the plastic, and then allows you to obviously just plier them and put a load of pressure on them and force things together. But you shouldn't do this either. It's much better to fix the tightness by sanding and drilling, etc., than it ever is to force something. But if you're like me and are at risk of occasionally getting impatient, then keep the stuff on hand. Don't let yourself use your teeth. Don't be me. The last step of the arms shows plugging holes. I was worried seeing it when I started building them, thinking I was going to have to manually peg everything like the hands, but no, it's unnecessary. I think it's just an option to fill the holes in case you find them ugly, and the holes I think are there for 3mm accessories and compatibility, so really just don't do it, don't cap them, don't fill in the holes, as you'd have a hard to impossible time removing them if you ever do want to use them as peg holes to add things onto. So overall, building the accessories is annoying in any kit, but this has so many, and they fit worse, that it takes up about half of the build, or feels like a little over half even, such that if you really want all of the accessories, if that's what you're buying it for, I'd be slightly more hesitant to recommend it compared to if you just wanted the mobile suit and it was the mobile suit design that you really liked. Except for the cannons and guns, they fit well enough. If it's specifically the backpack and its arms and attachments and everything that you want, then maybe just do it over a longer period of time, or prepare well and sand things and just know that it's going to be a bit more of an annoying build. I mentioned the hands there, so let's finally talk about those now. I dreaded them when first looking at the instructions, but they were actually okay and kind of fun because they're so unique. To put the fingers together, you're not clicking them together or anything, you just line them up and then you have to thread them with the peg. Then you cut off the small extra piece of runner that the pegs are attached to, and you're left with perfect pegged fingers. Well, not quite perfect, the peg still sticks out a little bit, it's a little longer than the hands, the fingers. It's not a good design for the hands. The peg still sticks out a bit and it still increases the finger hurt levels because of how much you have to press into the fingers and push the pegs in, and push on a small piece of plastic that can kind of dig into your hands a little. And it takes a while, but it's interesting. And a little tip actually is that you can actually use the nippers to push the peg in that last little bit. When it gets to the last part, it gets quite hard to push in and you can't really put force or leverage on it because there's not enough room for it to kind of dig into your hand enough for it to actually get force. So you can just use the nippers. The wrist was extremely tight going into the hand on one side, so much so that I could see it flexing the plastic and the handguard won't fully close on the hand. So I trimmed the other side, but now that one's quite loose. I foolishly didn't test fit that one first, so I don't know if I over trimmed it or if it was only an issue with one of the hands, but it was so tight I don't see how it could have been only one hand that was that tight, which is why I didn't test fit it. So, I don't know. The connection to the frame is also very tight, so I really do recommend being careful not to make it too loose. It might actually need to be as tight as it was in the first place, as the hand staying sturdy makes pushing the joint into the wrist easier. Also, in my opinion, the thumb design is too chunky, but the hands overall are too thin and unchunky for the design. They look nice in a vacuum with how sleek they are, which is helped by the guard being the same colour too, but the design is thick and strong, so they just don't match. Actually, I wonder if I can swap them with the Grandaddy 3.0's Gorilla hands. Anyway, after building the hands, beware, you'll have two very small leftover parts on the runner that you can easily miss. Just skip ahead in the instructions and put them in the hands to finish those two runners and get them in the bin. Otherwise, when you finish the mobile suit, you won't have finished any runners, which I think is slightly ridiculous build design, so when you finish the body, also skip ahead and do the Gundam head and leg boosters, and either do the shield or remove the one piece that's left on the runner for it, and that'll let you finish the A and L runners, and finally finish a runner and get some things out of the way. Here it is next to the RX-178 3.0 in full. It's unsurprisingly bigger and chunkier, but it's not a huge suit. It's nowhere near New Gundam or anything level. Like I said, I unfortunately don't have a Mk-II in the same scale to compare it with right now, but here it is next to the RG with the camera just zoomed in to make them the same height. Their similarities are obvious, but in hand and on a shelf their differences stand out far more, I feel. The yellow, of course, but also it having so much grey, and the grey actually being quite dark and contrasting, really stands out. Finally, articulation. Full 360. Up, down only a little bit, visor raises and lowers, neck only really moves back, very little at the shoulder, well at the butterfly, shoulder itself gets 90, just slightly beyond, bicep swivel, elbow gets 130 degrees or thereabouts. Torso goes slightly side to side, not a lot of movement, zero back at all. Waist can pull forward in order to better allow forward motion at the waist. It goes quite far, really far. Full splits, all the way back, aided by a slight drop down in the hip. All the way forward, 90 degrees, same as to the back. The drop down has a harder time dropping down when moving forward though. Also, a white part of the skirts kept popping off while I was moving the leg forward there. At maximum range of motion. Thigh swivel, gets that far in. Knee bend, hear the click. All the way, could maybe get it slightly more, but it just keeps moving back. You can see this panel pulled down and the knee separated. Toe joint can move up, down a little bit, full pivot. Ankle goes back that far, forward not really at all, but it's quite difficult to tell because it moves at an unusual pivot point. Functional is that far back, that far forward including the toe, Without the toe it's only that far forward, which isn't really forward at all. Functional pivot is further than the leg, further than I can do, because the other leg, despite doing the full splits, doesn't come out far enough to give clearance. Overall, I do recommend the kit if you want the final product. It's not one to get just for the fun of the build, but if you like and want the design, you'll be able to get through it, and it is sturdy and it does come with a lot while not costing very much. Considering the cost and the amount of not just plastic but also metal it comes with, it's actually priced more like a bootleg really than an original kit, and the build is still better than the cheapest of bootlegs or older ones or anything, so a little bit of buyer beware, but still recommended. Next video will be the V-Tiger Hi-Nu. I already have it built, I just need to make the video. Just there is in quotes because making the video is takes probably longer than the build. I also plan on doing a big review of the new Sinanju Steinwerka when it comes out, and all of its previous versions, so we can see just exactly how it's different. And so yeah, subscribe if you want to see any of that, or if you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, please leave it a like, it's very helpful. Sorry for taking so much of your time. I would have loved for this to be a much shorter video. That was part of why I was going to start making reviews, was kind of feeling like some reviews had gotten too long, and so I wanted to make short and snappy reviews, but turns out I suck at that. That's not me. I have too much to say. But hopefully the video's still dense enough and interesting. So thank you very much if you got through for all of this and are hearing this. Thank you. Until hopefully next time, bye.